Andrew, I guess while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I'm kind of curious what I don't know if you saw the announcement, Webflow getting I think it's a Series B funding for this year. I'm kind of curious like what you would like to see from Webflow, um, things that you've always wanted from Webflow, or just like maybe hoping they would maybe release a secondary product or something. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, I'm hoping Webflow is going to take on the other competitors in the visual development movement. Like right now, what you can use Webflow as like a membership portal, but you have things like MemberStack. You can't really create your own user accounts right now. So I kind of think the evolution of Webflow is creating user accounts, being able to actually create like backend workflows that happen when somebody triggers an event or clicks a button or signs up, and really like a richer database. Uh, I think that's what they're teeing up for, because there's a lot of movement in the space. I think the other competitor is Bubble, and they just raised a round. Like I don't think they're not as intuitive. So for everybody, we use Bubble right now across some projects for both ventures and Headway, and are doing some no code stuff. But Bubble's like experience is a lot different than Webflow. Like Webflow, you could hop in, you don't have to have any knowledge of design or development or any tools really, and you could learn it fairly quickly. Versus like Bubble and other tools are maybe more, a little bit more of a learning curve. Don't do what you expect. So like responsiveness in Bubble can be an issue versus
Hmm.
Webflow. Like their front end engine and how they handle responsiveness and queries and all of that just seems a lot more polished, and like what you want is what you get, right? Versus Bubble, you try to manipulate it, and then you view it in browser, and things are very much disconnected. So I think that's probably where they're going,
Hmm.
which I think is going to be welcome in this space, just from a usability standpoint. And obviously, they have tons and tons of customers.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
was surprised at the $2.1 billion valuation. I know that Bubble just raised around 3 months ago or 4 months ago, and they only raised 6 million. And
Mm.
so I don't know what the valuation is on that. It could have been a very small fraction, but it seems like Webflow's ecosystem is is pretty high performing, meaning like you can go there to get clonable websites. You can, there's a lot of people creating rich animations, even games like Civilization. Somebody created a game in Webflow, and so a lot of people like showcasing what's possible, um,
Yeah.
or that. And I think you can tell the companies that really have a customer focus because
Yeah.
the experiences are just so much better, and they always improve, right? Versus if you think of like Sketch in the early days, they had kind of um, beat out Adobe.
Hmm.
And if you think of like Figma today and how they were able to win against Sketch, it's because of their ability to focus on the feedback and the nuance, like the actually getting into designer workflows, developer workflows, and like creating tools that help that journey versus trying to um, I don't know, kind of rest on your laurels where, hey, we launched a great product that people are using today. They don't really stop it. The other thing, and I think this is important from a startup standpoint, as a tool, is Sketch was really beholden to, and still are, like, I'm not saying they're a bad tool, but they're really beholden to users updating. So in our work with like fintech companies or healthcare companies, if you're on Sketch, every new release, you have to get approval from IT. Every new
Mm.
release of InVision Design System Manager, you need approval from IT. Someone needs to download it. And so what happens is things don't get synced up right. Versus
Hmm.
Figma is all web based. They're pushing new updates. I don't know what the frequency is, but I anticipate like every day almost they're pushing brand new little tweaks, things here and there that are just ready for you. Right. That's kind of this world of web-based apps versus installable packages where you can't get that speed.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's two things I'm thinking about as you're saying that. One is I feel like Webflow, I mean, they've been around for I think 8 years now. I know the idea is older than 8 years, but I know they started building 8 years ago. And I think they're finally getting to that point because they have enough, customer information. They obviously have really great education on their site too. And as they're doing that, they're learning what are still gaps in like what people know and don't know, what to do with Webflow and all that kind of stuff. Like what's the learning curve? How can they make the learning curve easier? So I think that's like also like their marketing is solid. Like they've really like hit like a really good groove with marketing the last like couple years. So I think that's also been to their benefit. But I think what's interesting about Figma is that, and I think Webflow does this too. I don't see it as much with Webflow as far as speed, but Figma, like people will tweet like, "Oh, I wish Figma did this," and then like the next day, like there's an update with that thing, with that feature or idea, and it's like sometimes it's really simple, sometimes it's like a little bit bigger, but I think that like that speed to like you were saying, to just like make updates, make changes, like actually help customers like succeed better, because there's like this one thing that always bothers them that they can't do, or like, why can't I do this? It seems so simple. Oh, you're right. We can fix that. We'll make that happen. Um, and it doesn't, and a lot of those, some of those things could be probably bigger projects, but if it's such a small change that helps them with the workflows, and a lot of people are like upvoting it basically by retweeting or liking, it's like a really fast way without asking people to create an account on their forum and upvote and all that stuff. Because I feel like that's kind of a barrier for customers too. Because I remember even with Adobe, when there would be like bugs or crashes, like there was like this really serious bug with Adobe Audition in Premiere Pro like 5 years ago, where like I would send audio from Premiere to Audition, and then like I'd edit it and I'd bring it back. And for some reason, like half the time when I would hit play on the audio, it'd be this loud screeching sound. And I like almost like hurt my eardrums a couple times. I saw there were other people posting about it in the forums, but like there wasn't like enough of an upvote. And like not only that, logging into the Adobe accounts is just like so much of a hassle. And like they're so secure now because they ask for a code on your phone now and like all these different things. So I think like reducing that friction to help customers is like super important right now, as like people expect things to be faster and more efficient and just
Right.
perform better.
Yeah, and I think the things that that Figma and Webflow are doing in the marketing space, like hiring influencers as like advocates, and then having them do workshops, having them create free templates and things that give people, kind of stretch the capabilities and thoughts that they have on how they can leverage the tool. And so I think that's a big part of it as well. So like feedback loops, making sure those are really tight. So from the time you get feedback to the time it's implemented, every customer matters. Think if you had, um, if you were on like a workout plan and you only got feedback or acted on the feedback you had once a month
Yeah.
or once a year, right? Like, hey, you went and weighed yourself. You were tracking your meals. You thought it was working, but you weren't sure. Hey, a year from now you weigh in, you're like, oh, it's not actually working. Like that
Hmm.
feedback loop, like you're gonna get super unhealthy just by not focusing on measurement. I think like for companies, it's the feedback side of it that makes it important, where you get feedback, it's timely, you respond to it, and that builds trust with your customers. Like, hey, if I speak up, something's actually going to happen versus what's the point, and just kind of trudge through it.
Yeah, for sure. Looks like we have some folks joining us on YouTube. No questions yet, but if anyone has any question about um, a product idea, maybe you're a designer, maybe you're a developer, maybe you're trying to build a team, maybe you're getting to the point, just let us know. We'd definitely be happy to help with anything you're working on. Um, there was something else I was going to say and I can't remember now. Just wanted to make sure people knew we could answer questions.
Yeah, and just to recap for folks that are joining, Jacob and I were just catching up about Webflow and Figma and companies and tools that we use. That Webflow just raised 160 million on a 2.1 billion dollar valuation, so they're officially a unicorn. They might have been already. I'm not sure what their valuation was before, but exciting. And really, what does that mean for startups? What does that mean for building new visual development tools? Building apps on no code, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
um,
Sam actually shared a really cool update in Webflow today. I don't know if they actually announced it or not, but it's now showing when there's like it's starting to show like SEO audit stuff, which is super cool. So it's like, hey, alt tags are missing on these SVGs or whatever, and then it actually tells you like how to fix it. Like click here to resolve this issue. So like
hmm,
for the longest time with Webflow, I've always just felt like there's been this barrier of like SEO tools like within Webflow. Like you kind of have to do it out, like after you publish it, you do it versus like within the tool itself. Um, WordPress had like plugins that you could actually obviously use, and obviously Figma has plugins like similar to solving like an issue like that. But Webflow never really had a plugin type setup. But I think that's really cool that they're going in that direction, because I feel like a lot of WordPress users are like, well, Webflow doesn't have everything I need right now to do my same job. But I think this next year there might be a big push for more like SEO type tools. Hopefully within. Like that little like thing I saw, the screenshot that Sam showed me, I was like, that's awesome. Like that's what I've been wanting. Like a really
Right.
cool way to track where there's things that we can update, or like this auditing tool. So yeah, it was a really nice update this morning.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but it sounds like it's super valuable. I mean, otherwise you're going outside of the tool to try and figure out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So next week, I know Ryan and Robert will be talking about learning loops. Maybe like I kind of know what they are. Maybe you wanted to like, how much do you know about the learning loop process, and maybe give people an idea of what they'll be talking about next week.
Yeah, so from a learning loop standpoint, it's really this approach to revisiting um, what your assumption is, and really what an opportunity is, and putting it through. So there's kind of a juxtaposition between the lean startup approach of build, measure, learn, and this really gets back to, well, what's your main assumption, what's your theory, and what are the risks involved in this, and then what's the best way to learn. So it kind of takes a lot of the best practices in the industry of, hey, let's put a hypothesis out there, let's figure out what we want to learn. But I think the build, measure, learn can be, of the lean startup, can be misinterpreted by some startups, where they think that means build an app, right? And so I think that sometimes it gets a bad rap, where you're focusing on building something rather than experimenting. And so a lot of times in our slides, we've actually removed the word build, and it's experiment, measure, learn. And so that experiment could be customer interviews, it could be a landing page test. It could be using a type form to try and capture someone's profile information if it's a marketplace. It could be an email, really any experiment that you're trying to learn about someone's behavior. And then you can learn whether they did it or not. If they did, understand why. If they didn't, obviously you're not going to track them down if you're thinking about like conversion rates and things like that. So just a way to really approach, like, what are we trying to learn? What are the risks to it? And how might we learn it the best way? And then put that into practice and really cycle over highest risks first. So yeah, that'll be next week with Ryan and Robert. Is that on Tuesday?
That's on Thursday.
On Thursday next week.
Yep. And then the week after that, we have, and we'll be here every Wednesday, folks. If you have a question, don't have a question this week, but you have one next week, Wednesdays at 11 Central. And then the last week of January, Billy will be talking about design system promotion. So when there's a design system is complete, or there's an update to a design system, how do you properly promote or share that information to the development team or other designers in your team, or other people involved in that process, so that there's no gaps in information and everyone is up to date on the design system. So looking forward to that one too. I'm like actually super excited. We don't have it on the calendar yet. It's going up this week for February, because Clint and Ryan are going to talk about, they're going to walk through a case study with like how we've been working with Ditto, just the whole process of like validating the idea, experimenting, just the whole build, measure, learn process, and how we were able to get some traction for their idea. I think that's going to be super cool. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of great questions that'll come in from that event. So that'll be coming up in February. So yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good to just kind of look on how we, with the Ditto project specifically, starting with, an assumption around and kind of a solution idea. How do we unpack that and start learning about customer behavior and actually put that into practice? I know in the startup world, it can be easy to say, oh, I did the research and I talked to people, but how do you actually get commitment and get the numbers to support your decisions? So that'll be good for everybody here to tune into and really just see how we approach it in that scenario.
For sure. Before I asked you about Webflow and what you were hoping that Webflow would do this year, what about Figma? What do you feel like Figma could do this year to be a better tool for design teams and product teams?
That's tough. I think they're doing a lot right now. Like if you look at Figma's evolution, they started with a very focused offering for designers. And I remember being a heavy Sketch user and discounting it at first, being like, oh, people aren't gonna do this in the browser. What if I'm on a plane and I'm designing and I can't? But like they have offline mode. You just can't like download files from the internet like anything else. Like you can't be on a plane and go to Google Docs and pull up your slide, right? It's kind of the same concept, but they've started to really, I think, understand that customer journey for the startup teams that they're working on. Also, analytics around what things are used inside of design systems. So when you have the more premium plans, you get to see what items and components are being used, what files they're being used on. So starting to eat up more of this design development lifecycle. And on some of the projects that we've done to implement design systems, product managers are now using the tools and the blocks that we create as part of the design system to create more clarity with their team versus before what they were doing is like, here's an idea for a sketch. You can kind of use high fidelity prototypes and when you have an existing product, they can get that in front of a user where it feels real. So I think they're doing a lot of good things right. Like is the same thing in our discussion with Webflow. Um, they're empowering the community to create plugins. They have Figma community. We have some free resources on there. And I think part of that is, they're understanding the life cycle, they're living it and breathing it. As far as next steps, I think it's trying to, and some plugins do this, right? It's almost like the Apple model where they've started to cannibalize, good or bad, cannibalize some of the innovation that comes out of the community, right? Like with Apple Health, like that wasn't a thing 5 years ago, or with like screen time, that wasn't a thing for the longest time. You had these apps, and so I have mixed emotions about that, where you see somebody like build a business around an idea, and then like an operating system adopt it as like a core tenant. Um, but I think, yeah, I don't know, just more community enablement. I feel like they might start to go more into like when I think of that, I think of Bravo Apps, which is an app that takes your Figma files and allows you to connect it to a database so you can prototype mobile applications really quick. I see them kind of going more into this visual development space. But it'd be great to have Dylan, who's their CEO, or somebody else on, talk about their vision for the next 5-10 years and the big impact that they're trying to make in startups and in digital products and things like that.
Awesome. There was a comment Derek shared. I was asking everyone if they use Figma or Webflow. Derek said he uses both. They're both very fast way to play around and create something with unlimited boundaries. Oh, Derek said I think that's how I first heard about you. Derek, was it through Figma or through Webflow? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, I think Figma too, because we've been using it for our marketing team. I feel like, you don't want Figma to do too many things, because I know like you can't, it's hard to use Figma for like print projects and stuff. I know like Adobe Illustrator and other things are better for that. But I think there's some opportunities for just maybe Figma, like Figma for marketing teams, where it's like, hey, like having like maybe like a different, maybe it's like a different interface just for like more of that type of design versus like, hey, we need a whole design system or a whole like just kind of ecosystem that's like more focused on application/website, where it could be more like ecosystem for marketers, like a kind of a
Right.
better library setup. Like that might be kind of interesting. Almost like it could be like just basically like a turbocharged Canva type tool. Like I feel like there's, because Canva's cool, and it's really easy to use, but sometimes it's, if you want to scale your teams though, Canva's probably not the best option, because it's kind of limited. But yeah, I've definitely been enjoying, like, especially the feedback like that you can use with Figma, like leaving comments and just collaborating in a space. Canva is definitely not a place for that. Yeah, I think there's like some opportunity there, but obviously if that's not a priority for them, they're not going to do it. So
Right.
yeah, so
I think we do, yeah, like looking back, we do use Figma for marketing. We also use it on our sales team for like presentations. So like
yeah,
that made me think of like what the work that they're doing at Pitch,
yeah,
where it's kind of like, Google Slides, but it's better because it has some of those really instrumental things in place. Like, I don't know if they'll come across here, but they have like designs that get inherited. It's almost like a interactive, website where the headers are all connected, and you can do this on Google Drive. You just can't do it in quite an intuitive way as this, and like they have some really key workflow tools here where you can do approvals, you can assign people to things. Like you can't really do that if you're in a large organization, that even a small organization that is using slides. So I think like what you're saying and really what we recognize in the market is that like context matters. Like every marketing team isn't going to need it, and so like it depends on level of maturity, what they want out of it. And I think the same thing for any customer, really. Like for you to have the right angle at a particular problem, you need to understand that context. And so I think, yeah, like, a good path forward, like you mentioned for Figma, would be simplify the tools that are available to somebody in like a marketing mode, right? Or like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like beginner mode or whatever it is, where it's just like tools where you change color or font or something. Um, Same powerful Figma behind the hood, but like Figma for marketers with a different pricing model, probably.
Yeah, like I think it's definitely an opportunity. I mean, I feel like they could even build a separate tool that's just for like, so no people that don't know how to design but want to make a prototype. Like what if they had like a separate, like it's a little less overwhelming to look at, because it can be like when you open those panels and go deep dive into stuff, like what if they had a separate, desktop app, or maybe it could just be in the web browser too, specifically for like founders or people that have ideas that want to just create a quick prototype in Figma. Like there's design templates, obviously they have the Figma community, but I wonder if there's a way they could do that so it's less overwhelming to like start with, because it can be like someone that has like never opened even Photoshop, never opened anything really. Like they're a really good business minded person, they have a cool idea, or something, and they just want to like get like a sketched out thing. That could be something interesting too, just like a prototyping tool separately, um, just for idea validation. But yeah.
Yeah, I think, and this this is kind of the crux of a lot of companies, even as you get bigger. Like Adobe has a ton of different use cases
Mm-hmm.
and products, but like even if you had the same tool, Figma, like if you were to break out to marketing teams or sales teams for pitches or design teams or like, non-technical folks, like your value prop then becomes different, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why like if you're analyzing it, up against other marketing tools and it doesn't speak the same language, it's probably not going to, tee up to what to the experience you're expecting. I think that's true for any company. It's like there are all
Mm-hmm.
these things you could do with, and that's kind of like where you start with a problem or start with a solution or a technology and then try to figure out a problem to solve. It's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
thing, like once you launch the one thing that's very focused, you have like these new frontiers that you have to try and decide. And if you serve them all at once, like your message is probably too watered down.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, it's like, oh, I wish there was something like this from them. And it's like, well, that's probably not their goal. Like and it's like if they just stick with, I think there's a good thing about being like just really closed in on like one problem, like just helping design teams, and that's it. Because then that way they don't get distracted, and like all their efforts are towards that one solution. Um, but definitely, I feel like we're always just going to figure out a way to use Figma for whatever we can use it for. But I think it's just been cool to watch people create anything with Figma, like whether it's a game. Um, like we ended up playing a Pictionary in Figma as a team. I mean, you can basically do whatever you want with it if you understand what you can do with the tools. You can basically make it do what you want for the most part. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and kind of digging into a little bit to that value prop that they have, like where teams design together. Figma helps teams create, test, and ship better designs from start to finish, right? They don't really say like ship better marketing sites or like close more deals or, right? They're really focused on helping teams collaborate and really own a product to the end. And that kind of shows a lot of their, a lot of what they're working on. Obviously, there's different components to that.
Yeah, for sure. I do wish Figma was. I feel like Webflow does a really good job of being way more forward, with awareness on like education and like their Webflow videos are so good. Their educational videos. I feel like Figma, like the education stuff's there, but it's not like very forward. They're not forward about it a lot. I feel like they just keep adding stuff. But like if you're in the community, you see all the stuff and the updates, or like you learn all these things. But I feel like if you're new to Figma, it can definitely feel like, at least versus Webflow, like you kind of have to do a little bit of your own research to understand how to do stuff. Um, I don't know if you felt that way at all when Figma started, or do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think they've done a better job. Um, like Raji is now demoing a lot of that and creating small videos. I think that's really helpful. Like people from the community or advocates that are saying, "Hey, this thing's going to be available. Here's how you use it." But I
Mm-hmm.
think that it is kind of a weird like dichotomy because you have like this brand new thing that's going to make your life easier, but then you have all these files that you did the old way, right? Like, hey, we created all these buttons the old way, and now we have to convert them. Hey, we created all these things
Yeah.
without auto layout, now we have to convert them. So there is a little bit of catch up that you need to do when new things come out. That's like super instrumental. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think like ultimately it outweighs because you learn by redoing something, you already have a model around, and then you can go faster next time, which I think for any designer or developer, anyone really in their career, like learning new things, how to do things differently, I mean, is key. I mean, some design teams, and no knock on them, but still use Photoshop or still use Illustrator to try and do designs. And there's just so many more workflow things that Figma does well. Um, but I would say, yeah, it could be intimidating at first until you really find a project. The first thing for us was, hey, what's the first client project we're going to do to sink our teeth in? Because then we're kind of forced to figure it out. We don't
Mm-hmm.
really like, hey, fallback, great, we can convert it to Sketch. But that's really how we started, I think, in 2018, being able to have a client really preference it and request it for that collaboration aspect. And then we kind of fully wholeheartedly adopted it since then.
Yeah. Are there any like plugins in Figma that you kind of wish were there that aren't there? Because I know we're actually going to be releasing a blog post soon about the plugins we use, but I'm kind of curious if there's ones that you've noticed like that could help teams work better together.
I think a lot of the ideas that we have, and we've talked about creating plugins, and I think it's more workflow related. I think that's one of the ideas is like, hey, could we use Figma's API to index all of the screens and then the status of them, approved, in review, and then who's assigned to it. I think a lot of times that happens manually now on like Statmoji, or um, actually that was the name that Billy gave it, Statmoji, or like what's it called,
There's the
status
status
annotations.
annotations. Yeah.
Yeah, so using that to say like what the status is. But I think like a higher level tool that like zoomed you out from an individual view in a page and said like almost like a Kanban board, here's what's in review, here's who's doing this, here's when it's done, right? And taking those designs and chopping them up into more digestible pieces would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Derek said it'd be cool if they had kind of a feature in Figma where they kind of give you a status. Hey, would you like us to apply new features to existing projects and see the changes? It would apply changes, and you can choose to apply changes or keep the old ways. Because I think that is such a thing. I was thinking about Webflow. It's like at some point will Webflow change basically the foundation of how their websites are built? Like, because right now you're using this tool. I mean, I guess they'd have to do some kind of conversion of like elements that are all currently built on older sites and converting them. But I remember even with Simplecast, like they had an older platform for podcasters, and then they had to migrate to a new platform. You could still log into the old one, but they basically transferred all the information over for you, and then you just log into this new one instead. So I wonder what that's like to solve a problem like that. Like, how do you? I guess you kind of have to like build a conversion tool that like
Mm-hmm.
helps migrate from old platform to new platform. Um, but I'm sure it's like they probably don't want to do that too often. It's like, oh, let's make this platform last for 5 to 7 years, and then we'll migrate or something. I'm curious. I'm curious how often people think about that.
Yeah, I mean that's a real challenge businesses face is like, do we make it incrementally better over time, which is kind of my vote, right? Companies like Figma that do and kind of have you adopt them, or is there a cutover event,
Mm-hmm.
right, or something where you change the way you do it? Um, I think the migration is, or like the great migration where you just cut over to something, is definitely harder. Like totally new UI, very hard to adapt. The more incremental version is going to help people learn over time the new things that are there. But like I think that's why typically with websites, a general rule of thumb is like refreshes versus total redesigns, or really, evolving something versus scrapping it completely. So it would depend on customer adoption for sure.
Yeah, Derek commented on important lesson here when developing an app, thinking about updates and keeping any transition simple. Yeah, it's like reducing that friction for customers, because I mean, I've definitely felt it where like some tool gets updated and you're like, where did everything go? Like you're just like, where'd all the things
Right.
that I used to use go? And people, I think a good example that everybody usually can relate to. I haven't been on Facebook in a long time, but people would always talk about Facebook updates or Instagram updates, and they're just like, this sucks, like this looks dumb, or they're just not a fan of the styling. It's just kind of funny how once a change happens, everyone feels like, they're a product designer, but at the same time, they're the customer, and if they don't like it, but then somehow over time they just get used to it in a weird way too. I feel like when you're a large enough company, you kind of like that risk is less because people just deal with it because they don't want to disconnect from such a large ecosystem. But when you're smaller, the risk is definitely higher. Yeah. Have you seen like really good examples of that, Andrew, with like smaller start products or startups where it's like, hey, they're pushing kind of a bigger change because they realize like they're solving the wrong problem or whatever, so they're kind of changing like what their focus is and their solution.
Yeah, I think it depends. Like as we move into, I'm thinking more of like the future as we build more in no code and take that path, and companies do that. There's like a level of reliability and scalability that some tools might not have. And as a startup, it's a risk for you because all of your IP, your whole business is on a platform you don't own. So I think like there will be more larger migrations. I think the key there though is to try and keep the user experience. Like if you keep leveling up the UI and the experience someone has in your app, and then you make a transition more from an architecture standpoint, like that's smooth. I think it's a key thing that a lot of founders face when you think about when you start with a solution, when you go build something for the first time and no one wants it. You're kind of faced with a decision of, and we had talked about this in an upcoming blog, like rebuild or iterate. Like do I try to step back and rebuild what I have? Do I try to iterate on an existing solution? And I think our recommendation is always step back to the customer and who you're solving a problem for, what problem are you solving, and how motivated are they to solve it, and then use what you've built as almost like a prototype, even though it's more than that, but like a learning tool that you can get in front of somebody and learn why it is or isn't reaching the bar, and kind of iterate on that. But I think the most successful companies, if they're doing a replatform, keep the UI the same, and keep the front end feel the same, which is why design systems are important, because you could switch out a back end to anything or re-architect. Obviously, you need data migration and things like that. So I would say the companies that that don't, uh, I guess, don't decide to iterate, rebuilding it usually ends up in a different product and in a different experience.
Got it. I was gonna say, Derek keeps having some great comments here. Derek, you should just join us on the Zoom call here. There's the pinned comment at the top is a link. You can hop on the Zoom call. I'd love to just say hello, get to know you better, and see if there's anything we can do to help you today. Or just introduce yourself, and that's it. That's all good too. Oh, somebody actually have another comment here too while we wait for Derek to hop in if he wants to. Your thoughts on using a computer animated explainer video to show your app concept when pitching at the idea stage. Use a company to make the video versus creating a rough design with Figma and Webflow.
I would say it depends what you're trying to learn and what you're trying to test. I think a Webflow, platform is going to give you the ability to gauge, and maybe something that the explainer video is on that is going to allow somebody to actually sign up and take a first step. I think it can be very viable. One of the most popular ones that launch with this is Dropbox and Kickstarter. Every Kickstarter you have is like they might have a physical representation, a prototype of something that they're selling, but a lot of times it's a video, it's a story, it's how they make you feel, and that is all about. And maybe Jacob, you could talk a little bit about story brand and that approach. That's about really understanding, who your customer is, what journey they're on, and why this would help, what this would help them become, less about your service or product and more about the progress it helps them create. So I guess I would bounce that back to Jacob and say, what are your thoughts, if you're using a video, like how do you embody and what are some of the steps and approaches you take to embody the value in a script and in a story and in a narrative?
Yeah, I think honestly, I feel like the cheapest way I wouldn't really make a video yet. I mean, you could, but I think like the cheapest and fastest way to test a story or a narrative or a value proposition is literally I would literally just, create a free website. Like you could use any free website tool, whether it's WordPress. I know Webflow, you'd have to pay to get that hosted, WordPress or Wix or whatever. Like just find some free website tool and just create a landing page with messaging and test it and like get it in front of people and just ask them like, what are you thinking about as you read this? How would you describe this to somebody else? Would you buy this? How much do you think you would pay for this? Like these are all questions you can start to ask. And then I would do a couple different iterations of that. Talk to a couple customers a week if you can, or potential customers that you think would purchase this thing. And then once you get like a more refined script, story, or copy with that landing page, then you can turn that into a video. Because then you can show visuals, craft a story, have some music, whatever you want to do to really like push that narrative and like pull people in emotionally. And I think that's the next step there too, because you could even test like 2 videos even if you wanted to. It could be kind of the same thing. Yeah, so I would just start really simple with yourself. You could even, you could do it in Figma as well with slides and just like walk through it and just see what feedback you get. Just do like a Zoom call or whatever tool you use to record the call if you can. Because you want to listen during those calls. Try not to like take notes a bunch. It can be hard to listen and take notes at the same time. That's something that I've learned. It's like easier just to go back and analyze those recordings later. Because you want to make sure you're paying attention and able to ask more questions. But yeah, I would just like test really simple, iterate, make a more like dynamic thing, iterate, make a more dynamic thing, just keep testing and understanding what makes people like really interested, what makes them click, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's building a story brand is a great place to kind of start crafting your messaging. It's a great book. They also have some online courses and stuff. But yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I think one thing I would just add to that, Floss, is that you're going to want, you could start just based on your own assumptions, but most likely a lot of times where you would start and where we'd recommend starting is just problem discovery, which means like having conversations with people, understanding, getting more context around what they're doing today, how they're solving it. Are they investing money in it? Have they tried to solve it different ways? Like what are indicators that they're motivated to move this forward? And then the other part of that that's important for your messaging is what language are they using? How are they describing, their problem? How they see the marketplace. And that's totally before you recommend any solution or present them a video or do anything like that. So really understanding, where your users are at today or customers, potential customers are at, and then using that to build that first version of your landing page.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, welcome, Derek. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah. So where are you from? What do you do? I would love to just kind of get to know you better.
Yeah, so I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. I don't know if you guys can see me.
I don't know let me see. I actually can make you a panelist probably, and then you can try on your video.
I think it boots for a minute and then Derek should be right back.
All right, you should be able to unmute and to show your video. There we go.
There we go.
Awesome.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, so my name is Derek from Des Moines, Iowa. And I'm just a freelance web designer. I also do logos and branding for people. I used to work for my church. And since with all the pandemic stuff, that became very difficult. And so I've just taken up freelancing. As far as my involvement with apps, my friend and I are actually working on our first app together. I've been renting my entire life. And so we're making an app for property management, but like your smaller property managers. So think about, anyone that has a rental property that just wants to rent it out, and make some side income. So we're making an app for that, but also making it scale so it could be used by a larger corporation that has multiple properties. I've been involved in a lot of just kind of watching, Jason Fried with Signal versus Noise. Really love those guys. I have a Hey email address, so like I'm very supportive of what they do. I love their thought process, and I love how much attention and very intentional they are and how they design things and make things work. So they kind of make things work to the way they want things to work, not necessarily to maybe what users want, but what they believe and what they've tested amongst themselves. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess, with a little bit of other things.
Cool. Yeah, great to meet you. Thanks for thanks for the questions, comments, that sort of thing.
Of course.
Yeah, big fans of DHH and Jason Fried as well. Lots of books from them. As we started Headway, rework, remote, things don't have to be crazy
was a big one for me
at work. Yeah, a lot of good ones, a lot of good things, right? Like at Headway here, we try to really keep to 40 hours, which is very rare as an agency.
Yeah.
And so try to really strike that balance and fight for that with our clients and with our teams. And part of our kind of ethos of that is like introduce constraints to the team to use, our kind of crafts to be able to be most effective within that time. So.
Yeah, I was reminded, I don't know if you guys listened to the Foundation podcast back in the days with Kevin Rose.
Yeah.
One of my favorite episodes was with the founder of Sweet Green, his interview with him. And he was just saying how the constraints actually of the restaurant helped define what they could do and not do as far as products. And I just thought that was really fascinating. So they literally just allowed the constraints to define what products they could offer.
Mm-hmm. And you know this building. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. But I think it's really hard when, we were just talking about Figma and Webflow, where the boundaries are basically boundless. And so like you have to come up with constraints to kind of tighten things up for you, because they're making a tool that allows you to break free of constraints.
Right.
And so you have to create constraints. It's a very like yin and yang kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think like the answer, to a lot of teams is more hours, right? It's always more hours. Hey, we can do that. We need more time. We're going to work overtime. We're going to do, and I think that's good for a season. Definitely true. Like launches, key deadlines, but like that shouldn't be the norm. And so I like what you said, like the tools we have enable us to do things faster and arguably sometimes better and higher fidelity than we would in the past. So it's about trying to figure out what are the key things that we do, right? So that we have this margin to talk to customers, to do validation, to do things that with a smaller team, you wouldn't be able to.
Exactly. Well, it's nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, you too, Derek.
Yeah, thanks for hopping in.
Of course.
Yeah.
Good luck with your app. Is it launched?
No. I mean, we have a Webflow. We're still just doing the subdomain right now. We're prototyping everything really in Figma. But my friend, he's actually the developer and I'm the designer. And so I'm designing everything and he's building everything. I don't know exactly what's the lingo there, the frameworks, the tools that he's using. I think it's a lot of React is what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's basically he builds everything for the web, and then it takes things in the web and makes it for iOS and Android and any other platform. So I think that's correct. I don't know 100%.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so there's like React, which is web, and then React Native, which is kind of, you can adapt some of those React components and deploy them so that.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
too. Thanks, Derek.
Take care.
Good luck.
Awesome.
So one of the other things I was just adding for, I added in there for Floss is that, thinking through, hey, what resources or things do we have available as you're interviewing customers, and thought of Ryan and Robert's talk from a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And shared that out. So if you don't have the chat open or didn't see it, I dropped a link to a video that we did that's all time marked on customers, how you measure feedback, how do you identify them, all those fun things.
Yeah, I'll grab that link actually. Unless you beat me to it, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I shared it in there. It didn't add it as a link though, for some reason.
On YouTube?
Yeah.
Let's see. It's cool to see like our video library is getting so big that we need to like start to look at reorganizing it again. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. All right, I'll get that. I'll drop that in.
Any other looks like we have a few other people watching here. Anyone else have questions or things they want to talk through about their startup product, design dev? Yeah, thanks for adding that.
Yeah, Dick, be sure to, as you're making more progress on that product idea, be sure to come back at any point. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, or we can do some screen sharing and just talk about it. Happy to just kind of brainstorm on stuff with you. So in my mind, I feel like going after the smaller renters would just be a lot easier. And it also helps you like target your message too. As far as that, because there's a lot of people, like I've even thought about like if I have my own properties, like I would love to have a tool that's simple to use and that my tenants would love to use. Like if I had 1 or 2 properties but just want better communication, easier way to accept payment, maintenance requests, like all those things, that isn't super expensive either, because I know like you could build a tool for a large corporate renting companies, but it's such a different complex thing to solve, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully you can figure it out, Derek. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. I think we can wrap it up. Definitely great conversations today. I think we should try to think of news of the week to talk about every week.
Yeah.
I think the Webflow news was a good way to kick it off as we wait for folks to come in. So maybe we could even think about, if you think any questions that you want to discuss, Andrew, I'm definitely happy to do that. Otherwise, I'll think of something for you. So
yeah, that sounds good. And this is open for anybody to ask questions, pull up your app, promote your app. We can give thoughts and feedback, and kind of give our lens through things. So encourage folks to join. If you're not on the list, where do people get notified? I guess we're on YouTube every week, but for you to sign up, there's a Zoom link that goes out, so the people on Zoom can join in, ask questions via audio.
I'll drop that link on YouTube here. Yeah, if you register for the mailing list, you'll just get updates every week. And we'll also share like the recording too in case you missed it, which is still good. So and last week I ended up taking because we had questions last week, and I added timestamps. So if you want to like skim through it and you don't want to watch the whole thing, I'm like, I really wanted to learn about that discussion, or if there's nothing of interest that week, then you don't have to watch it. So trying to make it more accessible to people, so easier to watch, faster to find what you want out of the live streams. And actually reminds me, Andrew, and I'll just ask you now since I have you. I was talking to Sam yesterday, because as we do these each week, we'll have a playlist on YouTube, and I'm wondering if there's a way to automate, auto-populate the playlist of videos from YouTube into a Webflow collection. Like if there's a way to just like, hey, every time there's a new video, just pull the description and like all that kind of stuff and just bring it right in, and like that would just create like a piece of content basically on the site, and then we don't have to go through every week and like add it, pull things from YouTube, add it there manually. I was just kind of curious if you know of anything that does like that.
Yes, I think there is. I'll have to I don't know if it'll automatically pull, or if we can watch like an RSS feed and then like
Yeah,
have a cycle. There might be like a Zapier connection that we
yeah,
could
yeah,
do
yeah.
to connect.
Yeah, I was like, I feel like there's got to be a way to do it. I don't know if it's like super simple to set up, but I think that'd be great because then we're automatically adding that to the site if people are on the site and want to see that stuff. So,
Yep.
but yeah, awesome. Yeah, great discussions today. Looking forward to next week. Yeah, so be sure to head to headway.io and you can check out all our blog posts. Past recordings that we have on YouTube here are there with like notes and everything to all the resources. We have future events coming up. We'll be back here again next week. So if this is your first time joining us, be sure to subscribe and you get updates on these future live streams. And I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.